Hi, my name is Phil Colcord. I'm president of the Fraternal Order of Police, Evergreen Lodge 1 in Kitsap County, and this is our outreach program. Welcome to the show. We hope you enjoy it. Today I have the honored guest of Kevin McCarty. He's a public information officer for Kitsap County Sheriff's Office, and he has a lot of insight on the department and what they have to deal with and put up with the public, and also with telling about what he does as his job. So Kevin, first, can you just tell me a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm a former broadcast journalist. I was for many, many years, 22 of those with Cairo 7 in Seattle. And the last 16 of those, I worked the South Sound Bureau based out of Pierce County. We focused on areas south of Seattle because getting to them, because of traffic, had become more and more difficult. So we had to have people in the area. Plus, it's a growing area. I mean, Pierce County's been growing very fast, as has Kitsap County, Thurston counties. And those were basically the counties I covered, but you could go just about anywhere. I mean, the coverage area ranged all the way down to the Oregon border and beyond sometimes. So before that, I worked in Chicago, and prior to that, I worked in Sacramento. It's typical of somebody in television news. You tend to bounce around. Then I was with the State Gambling Commission for a while after I left television as a public information officer before this opportunity came to go to work for the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office, and I began that in January.
In January. Mm-hmm. And how do you like it so far?
I like it very much. I like working for Sheriff John Giese. I think he's got a really open mind about informing the public. He really wants to have a very transparent sheriff's office. He wants people to know what's going on. And he hired me to do that. He hired me to communicate directly with the public about what it is we're doing, so that people are aware of what their sheriff's office is up to and as transparent as possible.
I think that's an excellent idea. And before you, it was always a deputy, and then it was a sergeant that had that position, correct? Mm-hmm. And so, and I know the ones that were before you, and they were non-biased. They were straight to the point and told straight arrows in telling their story. But at the same time, being part of the brotherhood, I think with the news media's bent on things to some degree now, we need someone that is biased, that's not one of the brothers, to do the job, because it'll show, more direct, be more believable coming from someone that's not a cop than one that's a cop, I think.
Well, one of the things that has had to happen with law enforcement across the country is that basically law enforcement agencies have had to become their own news agencies. They've got to do the public outreach directly, as opposed to going through traditional media as was done in the past. In those days, if you were in a law enforcement agency, you didn't have access directly to the public unless you were speaking at a public event, or just mailing things out or putting out announcements. But you really relied on news media to get your message out if you wanted to get it out to a broad audience. That's changed dramatically now with social media. Now we can have direct public outreach. We can speak directly to the public. We can communicate and converse with the public. That happens all the time in messaging on our social media platforms. We can also produce things to show the public what it is we're doing, and what we want them to see behind the scenes. They don't often get the chance to do that. And you really don't have the opportunity to do that with television and newspapers much anymore, because they don't have the staff and the time that they used to have to do the stories that we'd like to see them do. Of course, they cover the news events that they feel are newsworthy. That's their jobs. We have to do the same within law enforcement now. Not only do we have to tell people the bad news, we get to tell them the good news, but we certainly have to be there to tell them when things are going on. We had an event like that yesterday, and we informed the public as soon as we could about what was happening and asked for the public's help, which is very valuable. There are a lot of people out there who might have information, as you're aware from your days in law enforcement. A lot of incidents, a lot of crimes can be solved by people who have information, by people who can come with a tip that helps investigators find the solution that they're looking for. So it gives us that opportunity to communicate directly with the public, and comes with a great responsibility to be transparent, to be accurate, and to be as honest as possible.
I can see that, and I think it's good to have that reputation. That's what you want to do. That's what the people are expecting of you. So, what's the difference between you and when a commissioned officer was doing the job?
Generally, when a commissioned officer was doing the job, that commissioned officer also had to do the job of a commissioned officer. For instance, my immediate predecessor was Lieutenant Ken Dickinson. In addition to being the public information officer, Ken had to be a lieutenant, and lieutenants have a lot to do. So it was a little bit easier prior to the conditions that we work under now, because for the most part, the PIO responded when the PIO was needed. When there was a question from news media, or when there was an incident or a crime that happened that caused the media to contact the agency, ask what was going on, when they requested an interview, things like that, the PIO would then come in and do that job. But now the PIO is focused more on public outreach on a pretty consistent level. It's a full-time job. So to have somebody do that all the time and have to do the duties of a sergeant or a lieutenant or even a deputy, it just becomes too much, especially in these days when a lot of agencies are shorthanded. They don't have enough people on the street to spare somebody, to take somebody off the street, go handle social media, go handle any traditional news media that contacts for information. So you want to have somebody that's there to do it and focus on it all the time, and also develop new outreach programs, new outreach ways to get out to the public and get the message out to the public. Because it's very important, especially where we are with law enforcement in this country right now, that we communicate with the public on a consistent level.
And you need to articulate things that didn't have time to do before.
Certainly. I mean, there was always, in my days in news, I would communicate with PIOs on an almost daily basis. They would always come up with stories, things that they wanted us to see. Would you like to do this? We're going to be doing this particular kind of training. We have this new program coming out. We have this new equipment. We would like to show the public what we're doing, where their money's going. It was really kind of a roll of the dice whether or not you had the time to do that, because you have a responsibility as a reporter to go cover the news of the day. Mm-hmm. So you may make arrangements to go do that sort of story with a law enforcement agency, and something happens and you're diverted to that. So now we don't have to wait for somebody else. We don't have to rely on their schedule. We can do it on our own. And we can show people what we're doing. And that's important because it's their tax dollars that pay for that job. Mm-hmm. So they need to see where that's going, and they need to see the people who are doing that job.
I agree completely. And they need to get to know the people more. Part of the problem, I think, that put us where we are today is the only time they heard about policemen in the news was when something terrific happened or some tragedy happened, or you had a cop that screwed up. And so it doesn't give them the real picture. They draw a conclusion that police are bad, or some police are bad, or a lot of police are bad, And what we thought, in fact, I was talking to John about this the other day, in the shipyard, if you have one thief, you got one thief. It doesn't condemn the whole, shipyard workers. But in the police department, if you got one thief, they look at every cop as being a thief. And so you need somebody out there like you that can show them what's going on, and so they get an understanding of what's real. It's a great idea, I think. How's this going across the country? Are other agencies hiring civilian PIOs too?
It's a trend that it's really sweeping through law enforcement nationwide. Larger departments will have not simply a civilian full-time public information officer. They'll have a communications director. And in some cases, some of the larger departments in the bigger cities, Los Angeles, Atlanta, places like that, they actually have their own in-house production units. Mm-hmm. So they have full-time video units that are covering what the departments are doing day in and day out. And That's a way to communicate directly with the public and to let the public know what's going on. It's also a way for them to promote when they need to, say, recruit new officers, or simply when they want to get a message out to people, an important message, something that's happening that they want to make the public aware of. Something as simple as a road closure or an incident that's underway and they want people to avoid. That way it can be done very quickly, very immediately. You can get out to tens of thousands of people on social media in very short order, inform them of what's happening, and let them know what they need to do in instances when they need to avoid a certain area.
That's good. You had talked about this a little bit, but the media, you said that they're understaffed now compared to what they used to be. And you look at the newspapers, there are a couple of sheets of paper. They're not a thick newspaper like they used to be. And it seems like the news media, in my opinion, they're looking for sensationalism and quick things that can pique the interest as opposed to covering all the news that happens. What's your input on that?
Well, there was an old saying, I can't remember who it was, I think it might have been William Randolph Hearst, but I could be wrong, who said it's not our job to inform, it's our job to startle. I think it's an exaggeration. I think a lot of people in the news media are there to inform, but their time is very limited now. Their staffs are very small. The reason that the newspapers have gotten so thin is because there's a lack of money. They don't have the advertisers they used to have, and the advertisers that supported them, and the subscribers that used to support them, and the classified ads that used to support them. Classified ads were a big economic driver for local newspapers for many, many, many years. Well, that's all been replaced by free ads online. Craigslist was the driver that everybody would know. That really sort of took a serious bite out of local classified ads. That was a huge portion of the income for traditional newspapers. A similar thing has been happening to television stations. Advertisers can now go on to social media. They can advertise through YouTube, for instance, have local ads roll as you're watching a video at home. You're scrolling through the videos. You can see an advertisement for something happening in your community. So they can spread their dollars much thinner, and they can go places other than traditional media, other than the news stations and the newscasts in the local market, so that they're losing money, so they have to cut staff. And that's really the problem. News is an expensive business. I did it for a long time. It costs a lot of money to do that job. It costs a lot of equipment, a lot of personnel, a lot of maintenance. So they have to get the biggest bang for their buck. So they just don't have the time they used to have to cover all the news that's happening around them. And they don't have the opportunity to travel as far as they used to. They're working hard. I know these people, I work with these people, I work with the local reporters here in Kitsap County, and I know that they're doing a hard job and that they're trying to do a good job. They have a lot more work to do than they used to. That was a luxury back in the old days, if you will, that they don't have anymore. Yeah. So it's incumbent upon us in public service to get those messages out.
Yeah, this might just answer the next question is, what is the most important thing for a public information officer to put on the table for their agency they work for their department?
Transparency. Transparency builds trust. If
I got a question for you.
Sure.
It's more for young people than the older, but can you give a simple definition of transparency?
Transparency is telling the truth whether it's good or bad. You're telling people the story, you're telling them what's happening even when it's bad news. And we've had situations at the Kitsap Sheriff's Office where we've had to do that, where we've had to talk about something that's happened that it's bad news. That's a tough thing to do. The human nature, we don't want to do that. Just as human beings, we don't want to give people bad news. But we have to do that when something happens. We had an an incident earlier this year that where we had to inform the public within a few hours of action that was taken by the sheriff's office. I don't want to go into the details.
That's fine.
But when we put it out, one of the things that I saw as I monitored our social media reactions were that people were glad that we said it, we put it out there right away. So when you tell people the bad news as well as the good news, they trust you. If you don't tell people what's going on, if you hold it close to the vest, sooner or later they find out.
And then they're upset.
Then they're upset.
And they don't trust you.
Why didn't you tell us that? So you have to be able to, when you have an answer, you need to tell them. You need to not wait for the question.
Yeah.
So.
And the thing of it is, some bad things are inexcusable and they should know better. But the majority of them are made in split second decisions. And, having been there and know how it can turn bad in a heartbeat, and you have to make sure you do the right thing. And then you have to justify what you did afterwards. And the justifying it after the fact, even though you may be totally justified, sometimes is difficult to see. And so I understand what you're saying. I think it's good that they know this. But a lot of people I heard, I talked to a lot of people, they're not sure what transparency means. So that's why I wanted you to say that. So thank you. I think that should be very helpful. What do you think is the most, I think you already answered this, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What do you think is the most important thing a PIO can do for the department he works for?
We tell our story. Tell our story to the public in the most complete fashion possible. And that means introducing them to the people who are doing the job so that they know, or at least they feel they know, the men and women who work in the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office. We have a video series that we do with deputies and people who work at the department, the agency, or the office, forgive me, called On Patrol. And what we do is ride along with deputies or go along with people doing training or go along with corrections officers up in the jail and show them doing their jobs and let them see these people at their job doing their work. And the idea behind that is they see the people who work for the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office as human beings. And they feel that they can get to know them a little bit. We've gotten very good reaction to that because people like to see that. They like to see where their money's going. They like to see where their tax dollars are going. They like to see that the people are working hard and doing an honest job. And so it's been very successful. And my goal as the PIO producing that is so that people have a feeling of familiarity and trust when they see people wearing the uniform of the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office.
And that's a good thing. And, I think we had that back in the early 70s and 70s because we went to all the schools. We talked to kindergartners on up. We even before DARE, we were in the schools for different functions all the time. We got to know the kids. We were not as busy as the officers are now. The officers now are kind of like what you're describing the news. They don't have enough time. They're inundated with too many calls. And, back in my day when we were deputy, in between calls, we go in the tavern and talk to the people in there while they're drinking and play pool with them sometimes, until we had a radio if we got a call. But we spent time getting to know the people. In fact, we were told when you're not doing a job, when between work, nighttime you check buildings to make sure they're secure. Daytime, you go and talk to people. I understand completely what you're saying, and I believe the deputies don't have the time now to do it, but you do, and that's great. So, tell me about some projects you got started in the sheriff's office. What's going on there now?
Well, one of the things we've just started, other than On Patrol, is we're going to be doing a series of videos on speed enforcement. Probably the number one complaint we hear from most people in the public is that people on their street are speeding. Maybe there's a school nearby, maybe there are kids around, of course they have their pets, they're pulling in and out of their driveways, and people are exceeding the speed limit. And we get a lot of messaging on social media, hey, could you guys come over here and do this, work this place? What we want to show is that our traffic unit is out there working a lot of areas. We want to show that speed enforcement is going on, and we want to encourage people to report when they're seeing a pattern. If they're seeing a pattern of speeding and dangerous driving on their street, it's important that the sheriff's office know about it. That way our traffic unit can go and focus on that area and send the message to drivers that they need to slow down, which is the goal of the traffic unit, not to ticket everybody, but to convince drivers that you need to drive slowly when you're driving along this stretch of road. There's a reason for it. There's a safety factor there. So that's a new project that we're beginning. We also have one where we feature videos and pictures of people who are caught in the act of committing crimes, mostly thefts, shoplifting, things like that. And we ask the public if they know these people. And that if they do know these people, we have an email tip line now that they can send tips into so that we can identify these people. Because retail theft is something a lot of people in the public are very tired of. A lot of people are familiar with the videos online of people walking into stores, grabbing arms full of merchandise and simply walking out the door. Staff is unable to do anything about it, and in many cases they're gone before any law enforcement is in the area. It's very hard to enforce. That's why we try to identify those people. We try to let the public know who those people are, and hopefully arrest those people and bring them to justice for those crimes.
One more thing, we're getting short on time here. What about, I know the sheriff's office is involved in outreach programs as far as helping the community. Can you speak about that a little bit? I know I talked to one of the officers. They carry Sally's list, a list of outreach programs in Kitsap County. They carry it around with them, and when they find someone, they give it to them and talk to them about, there's other options you have.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I know our community resource officers focus on trying to contact people who are in need, people who are experiencing homelessness, people who are having issues with drug addiction, and they try to, over and over again, give them access to those resources, inform them of where they can go for help.
They don't give up. They just keep coming back trying to help.
They keep coming back, and they keep going back to the same people and keep trying to convince them to get help. But difficult often to convince people on the first try. But if they go over and over and over again, eventually a lot of those people will say, yes, I want to do this now. I want that help. And that keeps them out of trouble and means they don't have to wind up in custody and in jail.
That's true. Anything else before we're running out of time here that you'd like to say?
All I'd like to say is that I encourage people to connect with our social media, watch what it is we're doing, comment and contact us, let us know what's going on, let us know what you think. That's why we're here.
Great. I just add quickly, chemical dependency, drug abuse, so forth, the biggest problem we have with society with that is it makes people desperate. And desperate people are the ones that commit crime. You could be good people, but then if you come to this point where you need a fix really bad, you commit crimes. And we need to keep working on these outreach programs and get these people the help. And like you said, the audacity to go back and keep there. They're being successful with some. It may take a few times, but they're being successful. I want to thank you for coming. It was great having you, and you're welcome to come back anytime you want. If you've got something that you want the public to know and you want to make a tape of it here, let me know and we'll make it happen.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And that concludes our show. I hope you folks got some good information out of that. I got some good information. And we'll be back again with another show. Until then, stay safe out there and be kind and help your neighbors. We all need help out there. Thank you.